So if we look at June 24, 2026, the steel train tracks running through the United Kingdom literally started to warp and buckle.
Right, under an unprecedented 35.8-degree heat wave.
Yeah, exactly. Which basically forced one of the world's most advanced economies into like an absolute standstill.
And, at that exact same moment, across the Atlantic, algorithms deep inside the U.S. Justice Department were uh, quietly sifting through millions of medical records.
Which is wild because that triggered the largest healthcare fraud bust in American history.
Yeah, and simultaneously, Wall Street was executing a multi-billion-dollar recalibration of the entire artificial intelligence sector.
Welcome to the deep dive. I am just so thrilled you're here with us. Today, we were taking a microscope to a single day, June 24, 2026.
We're unpacking a massive stack of global and domestic news briefings to see how all these, seemingly isolated events are actually pulling on the exact same structural threads.
Right. It's an incredible exercise in perspective, I think.
It really is. Because when you look at a daily briefing, it's so easy to just read the headlines as this random sequence of events.
A heat wave here, a stock market dip there, maybe a court ruling over there.
Exactly. But when you synthesize them, you start to see the underlying mechanics of a global system that is undergoing just immense stress, and rapid transformation.
Our mission today isn't just to give you like an audio ticker tape of what happened. We're looking for the why and the how.
But before we get into the heavy machinery of these stories, we really need to set some rules of engagement.
Yes, definitely. Because we are looking at a cross-section of the world, which means today's sources touch on some highly sensitive, deeply polarizing topics.
Right, spanning both left-wing and right-wing political spheres. We're talking domestic primaries, intense debates over war powers, immigration courts, all of it.
So I want to be entirely clear with you right up front. We are completely impartial guides on this journey.
You're not taking sides.
No, we are not endorsing any political viewpoints, and we are not validating the ideologies mentioned in the source material.
Our only mandate here is to objectively report what is in these briefings.
Exactly. We just want to unpack the underlying arguments so you can understand the actual mechanics of the debate.
Think of us as the architects showing you the blueprints of a building.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, we're just here to point out where the load-bearing walls are, where the stress fractures are forming, and how the plumbing connects.
And we leave it entirely up to you to decide if you actually like the design of the building.
Perfectly said.
So our roadmap today is going to follow a very specific chain reaction. We're starting with the physical reality, right? The extreme thermal heat-baking European infrastructure.
Then we'll trace how the energy demands of that physical heat collide directly with the financial heat cooling off in the AI and tech sectors.
Right, and from there, we'll look at the systems trying to hold everything together, specifically the shifting boundaries of government power in the courts and Congress.
And finally, we will bring it all back down to the ground level, looking at how everyday people and local communities are reacting to this macro-level chaos.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the most visceral reality of June 24, the weather.
The meteorological data we have from this day is just staggering. And not just because of the absolute temperatures, but because of where it's happening.
Right, the UK hitting its highest June temperature on record.
Yeah, and parts of France breaching the 40-degree mark. 40 degrees Celsius in France.
Wow. And when an environment that is historically temperate experiences this kind of acute thermal spike, it just exposes all the vulnerabilities in infrastructure that was simply never designed for it.
Right, because if it's 40 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona, society functions perfectly normally.
Exactly. The grid is built for peak air conditioning load. The buildings are designed to deflect heat. The asphalt is formulated for high temperatures.
But when you look at the briefings for London and Paris, you are looking at cities built largely of Victorian brick, dense concrete, and centuries-old masonry.
Which acts totally differently.
Yeah, you're dealing with the urban heat island effect, but on steroids. Those older, dense materials have low albedo.
And just to clarify for everyone, that means they absorb shortwave solar radiation during the day rather than reflecting it, right?
Precisely. Then at night, they slowly emit that heat as long-wave radiation. So the ambient temperature in the city never actually drops.
There's just no thermal relief at all.
No. And the World Health Organization's sources from this day are extremely explicit about what that means for human biology, particularly for the elderly.
Because when the ambient temperature doesn't drop at night, the human cardiovascular system basically cannot rest.
Right. It's constantly working to shed heat, which directly leads to the spikes in excess mortality we see in these briefings.
And the physical infrastructure is reacting the exact same way. The briefings note severe disruptions to public transit, specifically rail.
Because the steel rails are undergoing thermal expansion.
Yeah, if the ambient air is 35 degrees, the steel track sitting in direct sunlight can easily hit 50 degrees.
The metal literally expands and runs out of room. It causes what they call sun kinks, or buckling,
So the transportation authorities have to mandate massive speed restrictions.
which effectively grinds the economy to a halt. It's a cascading failure.
And what's fascinating here is the geopolitical backdrop to this physical crisis. Because right as the rails are literally melting, London is hosting Climate Action Week.
Right. So inside these nice air-conditioned conference centers, you have United Nations officials and global policymakers debating the long-term trajectory of atmospheric warming.
But the sources reveal a really intense friction in those debates. It's not just a unified chorus of we must lower emissions.
No, the immediate reality of the heat wave is actually complicating the long-term climate goals. It's the ultimate policy paradox.
Break that down a bit.
Well, the UN is warning that billions of people are increasingly exposed to lethal heat stress, right?
Yeah.
So the obvious short-term adaptation is mass deployment of cooling systems, air conditioning.
But retrofitting European cities with AC requires a monumental surge in electricity demand.
Exactly. And if your baseload power grid is still heavily reliant on natural gas or coal, suddenly adapting to the heat waves in the short term drives up the exact greenhouse gas emissions you were trying to cut in the long term.
Oh, wow. So governments are caught in a total vice.
Yeah, environmental advocates are demanding rapid decarbonization, while state energy ministers are terrified of grid collapse and blackouts if they decommission fossil fuel plants before renewable capacity is fully viable.
The sources also highlight the UK royal family's engagements during this week. They're out doing diplomatic meetings, touring sustainability initiatives.
Right, it's framed as a major push of soft diplomacy.
But honestly, I have to push back on this on behalf of our listeners.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I'm a commuter stuck on a stalled train because the tracks are buckled, or an outdoor laborer who just lost a week's wages due to heat restrictions, a royal photo op at a green energy startup feels entirely disconnected from my reality.
I mean, that is a very fair point.
Does this kind of high-level soft power actually move the needle on the physical engineering challenges we're talking about? Or is it just institutional window dressing?
That is exactly the dividing line in the analysis of these events. The critics absolutely share your perspective.
Right.
They view soft power in the face of an acute infrastructure crisis as essentially performative. It doesn't pour new high-temperature asphalt, it doesn't upgrade the transformers on the grid, and it certainly doesn't cool down a masonry apartment building.
Exactly. A speech doesn't generate megawatts.
No, it doesn't. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the defenders of these diplomatic institutions argue that soft power is the mandatory prerequisite for hard capital.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning to rebuild the European grid, to retrofit centuries of architecture. You are talking about trillions of euros in capital expenditure.
Massive amounts of money.
And you cannot mobilize that kind of capital or pass the taxation required to fund it without maintaining a unified public and political consensus.
I see.
The argument is that the royal family and the UN are utilizing their cultural visibility to maintain that fragile consensus.
Okay, that makes sense. But eventually, the rhetoric has to translate into hardware.
Yes. And hardware requires technology, and technology requires massive financial investment.
Which provides the perfect pivot point to the second major theme in today's briefing.
Because at the exact same moment that Europe is realizing it needs an unprecedented technological overhaul to survive the physical climate.
The financial markets backing the world's most advanced technology are suddenly hitting the brakes.
Right. The U.S. markets took a significant hit on June 24.
Yeah, we are looking at the NASDAQ dropping over 2%, the S&P 500 down 1.4%, and it was highly concentrated in the semiconductor and AI infrastructure space.
The financial analysts in the briefing refer to this as a sector rotation.
And to understand what that actually means, we have to look at the mechanics of how the artificial intelligence boom has been financed up to this point.
Right. Break that down, because a 2% drop doesn't mean the technology suddenly stopped working.
Exactly. The underlying technology is functioning perfectly well. But think about the AI industry, like the construction of a transcontinental railroad.
Okay, I'm with you.
For the past couple of years, investors have been throwing billions of dollars at the companies making the steel, the rail ties, and the dynamite.
In the AI world, that means the semiconductor foundries, the chip designers like NVIDIA and AMD, and the companies building the massive data centers.
Right. This is called capital expenditure, or CapEx.
And the valuations of these infrastructure companies skyrocketed because the assumption was that the demand for the railroad would be infinite.
But eventually you have to actually run the trains and sell the tickets.
Precisely. And that's where the market rotation happens.
Right.
Investors are looking at the tech giants who bought all those chips and asking, okay, you built the data center. Where is the consumer software revenue? Where is the enterprise subscription revenue that justifies the billions you spent on the hardware?
Right. They want to see the return on investment.
Exactly. When the immediate software revenue doesn't mathematically align with the astronomical valuations of the hardware companies, the price-to-earnings multiples compress.
So investors take their profits from the hardware stocks and rotate that capital into more stable, maybe undervalued sectors of the economy.
It's not a rejection of AI. It's the market demanding proof of a sustainable business model beyond just laying the tracks.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because while Wall Street is suddenly clutching its pearls and wondering if the upfront cost of AI is justified, the U.S. government is over here quietly proving exactly how powerful and lucrative these massive data models have become.
It is a stunning juxtaposition.
On the exact same day the NASDAQ is selling off AI infrastructure, the Department of Justice announces one of the largest healthcare fraud crackdowns in American history.
The DOJ sweep involved 455 defendants across dozens of districts. They uncovered billions of dollars in alleged fraudulent billing, kickback schemes, and false claims.
And the primary weapon the DOJ used to catch them wasn't shoe leather detective work, It was advanced data analytics.
Right, they didn't have FBI agents sitting in a room reading individual Medicare receipts.
No, they deployed algorithms to sift through millions of lines of medical billing codes to detect statistical anomalies.
It changes the entire paradigm of enforcement.
How so?
Well, historically, healthcare fraud was caught either through whistleblowers or obvious catastrophic audits.
Right.
But with advanced data analytics, the government can establish a baseline for every single medical billing code across the country. Let's take upcoding as an example.
Where a provider bills for a highly complex, expensive procedure when they only provided a basic checkup.
Exactly, billing for an MRI when you just gave them an aspirin. Or phantom billing, where the patient doesn't even exist.
A human investigator might not notice if a clinic in Miami slowly increases its billing for motorized wheelchairs by 15% over a year.
Right. But a machine learning model looking at standard deviations across the entire national Medicare database will flag that clinic instantly.
It's incredible. The AI maps network density. It sees that, say, 3 specific doctors are referring all their patients to one specific pharmacy in a closed reciprocal loop.
It is a highly sophisticated dragnet.
It's a huge success story for the application of big data. But the sources reveal a really sharp divide in how this massive bust is being interpreted.
Yeah, law enforcement and regulators are taking a victory lap, praising the technology.
But healthcare policy critics look at this exact same bust and see a complete systemic failure.
Because the critics are asking the structural question.
Yeah.
They argue that if 455 different people were able to casually siphon billions of dollars out of the system before the algorithms finally caught them.
It means the underlying architecture of American healthcare billing is fundamentally broken.
Exactly. It is a system built on trust and highly convoluted coding structures that practically invite exploitation.
It's the leaky roof analogy, right?
Exactly. The DOJ just proudly unveiled the world's most technologically advanced bucket to catch the water, and everyone is applauding the bucket.
But the critics are pointing up at the ceiling asking, why is the roof structurally incapable of keeping the water out in the first place?
Right. Catching the fraud after the money has already been paid out is incredibly inefficient.
And this theme, trying to patch a structurally broken system with a massive intervention, transitions perfectly into the other major domestic economic story from this day.
The briefings detail a massive, bipartisan housing affordability bill moving through the U.S. Congress.
Housing is the universal pressure point right now.
Absolutely. The sources are clear that public anxiety over the cost of living, specifically housing outpacing wage growth, is reaching a fever pitch.
And this congressional bill aims to address it through 3 mechanisms: supply-side incentives, reducing regulatory red tape, and expanding financing mechanisms to help buyers.
But just like the healthcare debate, economists are deeply divided on the actual mechanics of this intervention.
The proponents of the bill argue from a macroeconomic perspective.
Right. They believe that by injecting federal capital into the market, providing subsidies for construction, and expanding access to mortgages, you can force the market to build the supply necessary to eventually bring prices down.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Because anyone who has looked at the real estate market recently knows that the bottleneck isn't usually a lack of federal funding.
No, it's not.
The bottleneck is local. It's zoning laws. It's municipalities maintaining strict single-family zoning and blocking high-density apartment construction.
Yes.
It's the cost of lumber and the severe shortage of skilled tradespeople. If you don't fix those underlying structural issues and you just pump billions of dollars of federal financing into the market to help people buy homes.
Don't you just trigger induced demand?
Exactly.
That is precisely the counterargument laid out in the economic briefings. The theory of induced demand in this context suggests something really problematic. That if you give 1 million aspiring home buyers a federal subsidy to increase their purchasing power, but you haven't actually built any new houses for them to buy because the local zoning board rejected the permits.
All you've done is arm those buyers with more cash to bid against each other for the exact same limited inventory.
Which just drives the prices even higher.
Right. The critics argue that housing is intrinsically a localized market governed by local municipal codes.
A sweeping federal bill cannot forcibly rewrite a town's zoning map.
Therefore, pouring demand-side subsidies into a supply-constrained market is economically counterproductive in the short term.
It highlights the profound tension between federal intent and local authority.
And that tension over authority, who actually has the power to dictate reality on the ground, is the perfect bridge to our next set of briefings.
Because June 24 wasn't just a day of physical and economic stress. It was a day defined by profound institutional friction.
We are looking at a three-way tug-of-war across the legislative, executive, and judicial branches.
Let's start with the friction between the legislative and executive branches. The briefing outlines a significant moment in the U.S. Senate.
Right, a bipartisan resolution rebuking the president's unilateral war authority regarding military posture toward Iran.
Specifically concerning maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical geopolitical choke points on the planet, right?
Absolutely. A massive percentage of the world's oil flows right through it. So any military posturing there has immediate global economic ramifications.
And the international intelligence analysts in the source material use a very specific phrase to describe the current state of affairs there.
Yes, they call it managed tension.
What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, managed tension is a deliberate, highly calculated geopolitical strategy.
Okay.
It means that adversarial nations are actively engaging in military signaling navies, conducting aggressive maneuvers, missile tests, targeted sanctions.
But they're carefully calibrating these actions to stay just below the threshold that would trigger a full-scale, undeniable kinetic war.
It's like two cars playing a game of chicken, accelerating toward each other. But both drivers have their foot hovering right over the brake pedal.
They want to scare the other guy into swerving, but neither actually wants the head-on collision.
Exactly. But it is an incredibly precarious state because miscalculation is always possible.
Right. One misread radar signal, and the managed tension becomes an unmanaged conflict.
And it is within this hypersensitive context that the Senate passed its resolution.
Legally speaking, the resolution is largely symbolic, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't instantly defund a carrier strike group or physically tie the president's hands, but politically, it is a massive signal regarding constitutional authority.
The debate here traces all the way back to the core of the U.S. Constitution. Article 1 gives Congress the power to declare war.
But Article 2 designates the president as commander-in-chief of the armed forces.
Right. And for decades, the executive branch has utilized military force without formal congressional declarations.
The supporters of this Senate resolution argue that it is a necessary clawback of power.
They argue the legislative branch must assert its oversight to prevent a unilateral escalation in a powder keg region.
But the critics of the resolution argue from the perspective of geopolitical deterrence.
Okay, what's their angle?
They assert that in a state of managed tension, the executive must project absolute unified strength.
By passing a resolution that publicly signals domestic division and questions the president's authority to act unilaterally.
Critics argue that Congress is inadvertently emboldening adversaries.
The fear is that if foreign powers believe the U.S. executive is politically constrained, they might push the boundaries of that managed tension much further.
Exactly. It's a debate over whether democratic checks and balances are a liability in a fast-moving geopolitical crisis.
And that exact same debate over executive oversight is happening internally within the executive branch itself.
The briefing also details significant personnel shakeups and restructuring within the U.S. intelligence community leadership.
This is a highly sensitive development, right? Involving internal disputes over how intelligence is gathered, analyzed, and briefed to the executive.
And the reactions in the source material are deeply polarized.
On one side, you have proponents who frame this restructuring as vital administrative reform.
The argument is that intelligence agencies are ultimately subordinate to the elected executive.
And bringing in new leadership ensures that these massive, opaque bureaucracies remain accountable to the administration's policy directives.
Right, it's framed as improving efficiency and dismantling bureaucratic inertia.
Conversely, the critics view these same personnel changes as a severe threat to national security.
Their argument is rooted in the concept of institutional independence. They warn that replacing career intelligence officials with politically aligned appointees risks the politicization of intelligence.
The fundamental danger is that if analysts believe their careers depend on supporting the administration's pre-existing policy preferences,
They may consciously or unconsciously skew their threat assessments to match what the executive wants to hear, rather than presenting objective, hard truths.
wow, it is the ultimate dilemma of the administrative state. How do you maintain oversight of the intelligence apparatus without corrupting the objectivity of the intelligence itself?
And when the executive and legislative branches are locked in these structural battles, the system relies on the judicial branch to act as the referee.
And the legal briefings from June 24 are absolute fascinating on that front.
Because we see the courts pulling executive power in two completely opposite directions on the exact same day, specifically regarding immigration enforcement.
It is a remarkable legal juxtaposition. Let's look at the first ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court.
The court issued a decision that significantly expanded the authority of the executive branch at the border.
Specifically, they lowered the evidentiary standard required for immigration officials to deny re-entry to certain lawful permanent residents, green card holders at ports of entry.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that, because lowering the evidentiary standard sounds incredibly dry, but it functionally rewrites the rules of engagement.
In the legal system, the evidentiary standard is the burden of proof. It's how high the bar is set for the government to take an action against an individual.
Right. So by lowering that standard, the Supreme Court is saying the government needs less concrete proof, less documentation to make the determination to exclude someone.
It effectively widens the umbrella of discretion for the border agent on the ground.
Precisely. It streamlines the enforcement process.
Proponents of the ruling argue this is a necessary adjustment to enhance border security efficiency.
They argue that border agents operating in high-volume, high-stakes environments need broader legal deference to make rapid determinations.
Without being bogged down by the stringent evidentiary requirements you would expect in a prolonged courtroom trial.
But civil rights advocates in the briefing argue that this severely compromises due process.
They point out that a green card holder is a lawful resident with established ties to the country.
And lowering the burden of proof vastly increases the statistical probability of wrongful exclusion based on an agent's subjective discretion.
So you have the Supreme Court expanding the executive's enforcement perimeter at the border. But on the exact same day, a lower federal court issued a ruling that actively blocked a government policy concerning interior enforcement.
Right. The policy in question would have expanded the ability of immigration agents to make administrative arrests inside federal immigration courthouses.
So the Supreme Court says the government has more leeway at the border checkpoint.
But the federal court says the government has strictly limited leeway inside the actual courthouse.
Why did the federal court block it?
The federal court's reasoning was rooted entirely in the mechanics of the judicial process. Advocacy groups argued that allowing enforcement agents to stake out courthouses creates an absolute chilling effect.
Meaning people won't show up to court.
Exactly. If an undocumented individual, or even a lawful resident with a pending administrative issue, believes they will be detained the moment they walk through the courthouse doors, They will simply default on their hearings.
They just won't show up.
The court ruled that this dynamic fundamentally undermines the integrity and functional accessibility of the judicial system itself.
It's an incredible dynamic. You have two different levels of the judiciary trying to balance the mandate for national security efficiency against the constitutional mandate for due process.
It proves that the boundaries of executive power aren't fixed in stone. They are highly elastic, constantly being stretched by enforcement agencies and snapped back by the courts.
And these macro-level institutional battles don't just stay in Washington, D.C. or the courts. They trickle down.
The friction alters the political landscape at the local level.
Which brings us to the final major theme of the day: how the electorate and the culture are absorbing all of this tension.
And we see that absorption directly in the electoral data from the New York Democratic primaries held on this day.
The briefings detail a highly significant shift in the political center of gravity within the party.
A wave of progressive candidates, notably aligned with the Mamdani-backed movement, achieved major victories.
In several cases, unseating established legacy incumbents in key House and state districts.
For context, this isn't just about a change in personnel. It's a fundamental shift in political mechanics.
Right. These grassroots progressive movements, often aligned with organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, don't rely on the traditional establishment coalition of county party machines.
Or massive corporate fundraising, for that matter.
No. They utilize highly sophisticated relational organizing, focusing heavily on hyperlocal material conditions.
Things like tenant protections, utility democratization, and transit funding.
Which strongly resonates with the shifting demographics of urban working-class districts in boroughs like Queens and Brooklyn.
The analysis of these primary results highlights a profound internal debate within the Democratic Party.
The progressive wing interprets these victories as undeniable proof of a mandate.
They see a voter base that is exhausted by legacy politics and incrementalism, demanding sweeping structural change.
To them, these wins validate their grassroots organizing model.
But the moderate establishment wing is looking at these exact same victories with immense trepidation.
Why are they so worried if their party is winning the seats?
Because the moderates are operating on a different strategic timeline. They're looking ahead to the general election.
Ah, right.
The moderate concern is based on the median voter theorem, the idea that national elections are won in the political center.
They argue that while aggressive progressive platforms regarding housing and corporate taxation might energize a deep blue urban primary base,
those same policies could easily alienate the centrist and swing voters necessary to hold a broader national majority in November.
it is a fundamental disagreement over whether the path to victory lies in persuasion of the center or mobilization of the base.
And that debate over who actually holds the influence in politics was mirrored in the media environment that same day.
The briefing highlights a major investigative expose that dropped, scrutinizing the political and ideological advisory networks surrounding a prominent public figure.
This report dug deep into the mechanics of political influence, examining the long-term relationships, the think tanks, and the advisory boards that shape public messaging.
It raises vital questions about transparency. In modern politics, the person at the podium is often the distillation of a massive network of external advisors.
And the public reaction to this expose perfectly illustrates the fractured nature of our media consumption.
The sources show that the validity of the investigative journalism was judged entirely through a partisan lens.
Supporters of the public figure dismissed the entire investigation as a bad faith, politically motivated smear campaign designed to generate clickbait.
Meanwhile, critics treated the report as gospel, championing it as essential accountability journalism, exposing the dark money influences of shadow advisors.
A single piece of deeply researched text was simultaneously processed as absolute truth and total fiction, depending on the algorithm of the reader.
When you aggregate all of this, the buckling infrastructure, the volatile stock recalibrations, the constitutional brinkmanship, and the deeply polarized political and media environments,
It paints a picture of a society operating under a tremendous, almost suffocating amount of complex structural tension.
it is exhausting just to analyze it, but this is where the briefing takes a truly fascinating, deeply human turn.
Because human beings cannot exist in a state of perpetual, unresolved, systemic tension. We require a release valve.
And the global sources note exactly where millions of people turn their attention on this day, to Brisbane, Australia.
Where a major welterweight boxing title defense was officially announced.
It seems like a non sequitur, going from geopolitical tension to a boxing match. but it is culturally profound.
You have a defending champion facing a former division title holder.
The promoters are talking about regional visibility. The analysts are calculating the implications for future global title unifications.
But the real significance is the psychological function the sport serves.
Think about it in contrast to everything else we've discussed today. We talked about the managed tension in the Strait of Hormuz.
An ambiguous, high-stakes geopolitical standoff where the rules are unwritten, the players are hidden, and there's no clear end date.
It breeds anxiety. But a boxing match is the exact opposite.
Precisely. A boxing match is a highly contained, fully regulated narrative.
It takes place in a 20-foot square. It has explicit rules. It has a referee to enforce those rules.
It lasts exactly 12 rounds, or 36 minutes, and at the end of it, there's a definitive, undeniable winner and a loser.
In an era where complex algorithms dictate our healthcare and global supply chains determine our housing costs, combat sports offer the public an easily digestible, zero-sum narrative with a guaranteed resolution.
It is managed conflict in its purest form.
And that deep human need for connection and resolution brings us to the final data point in the briefings.
Away from the global sports stage and away from the heavy national politics, local reporting across the U.S. was dominated by something incredibly simple.
The rollout of summer community programming.
We are talking about local governments expanding funding for municipal music festivals, outdoor environmental education for kids, and neighborhood block parties.
It is easy to dismiss those stories as fluff in a global news briefing, but sociologically, they represent the critical maintenance of social infrastructure.
When macro institutions like the federal government, the global tech markets, or the international climate agreements feel distant, chaotic, or gridlocked, people instinctively turn inward.
They invest in their immediate physical geography. It's the cultivation of social capital.
Attending a local music series in a public park doesn't lower the temperature of the European heat wave.
And it doesn't fix the capex issues of the semiconductor industry.
But it forces you to share physical space with your neighbors. It builds the foundational trust and social cohesion that a community actually needs to survive when those macro-level crises inevitably trickle down to the local level.
It is the ultimate counterbalance to global anxiety. So what does this all mean? When we step back from the microscope and look at the entirety of June 24th, 2026, what is the through line?
If we synthesize the data, June 24, 2026 is a portrait of a civilization caught in the friction of transition.
We are witnessing the collision between legacy systems and unprecedented modern pressures.
The physical architecture of Europe cannot withstand the new thermal reality of the atmosphere.
The traditional valuation models of Wall Street are struggling to accurately price the revolutionary potential of artificial intelligence.
The constitutional frameworks written centuries ago are straining to manage the speed of modern geopolitical warfare and digital intelligence.
The systems are buckling, just like the rails in London.
But simultaneously, we see incredible adaptation. Algorithms catching billions in fraud, new political movements rising to challenge the status quo, and communities continuing to gather, find joy, and build local resilience.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to carry with you today. When you absorb the reality of this single day, it begs a massive question about the trajectory we are on.
Are we currently living in an era where our global problems, climate change, technological disruption, systemic inequality, have finally permanently outpaced the speed and capacity of our legacy institutions to solve them?
Or are we simply enduring the messy, painful, but entirely necessary transition period required to dismantle the old world and build completely new systems of governance, economics, and survival?
It's definitely something to think about.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, being truly well-informed isn't about memorizing the exact fraction of a percent the S&P dropped or knowing the name of every political candidate.
It is about understanding the underlying mechanics. It's about seeing how the energy demands of a heat wave connect to the servers running the AI algorithms.
And how the rules of our society are constantly being negotiated in the courts and in the streets. Until next time, keep connecting the dots.